We are live on the RotoViz Best Ball Show. We are about to get into the DK Best Ball drafting streets and try to win some cash over there, Tom. That is what we were trying. I'm joined by the wonderful Tom Strachan. We're also going to talk about our favorite and key priority targets, particularly in those opening rounds of the draft. And we'll talk about the rest of the players as we work our way through. But I'm excited to do that. We're going to try and have a theme for each of these shows when we have been doing it recently. We have had one show here, I believe, Tom, one show on your channel, the Fantasy Football Sanctuary, which will be linked in today's show notes. You can check them out there, the great work that Tom and the crew are doing over there. Lots of best ball content, but lots of dynasty stuff as well, so check that out. But we're going to kick it off in a moment with the fantasy football takes. But Tom, as we sit here on a Tuesday afternoon for us, morning time over in the States, how are you getting ready as we get ready to draft here? How are you feeling?
Yeah, good. I've been kind of spending a bit of time starting to look at exposures. I think I'm through 40 drafts on DraftKings now. And so it's just kind of at that point where I want to start being more conscious of what I'm building, what players am I taking too much of that I don't want that much exposure to, and what players do I not have enough exposure to. It feels like with the lull in NFL news, a good time to be doing that.
Yeah, it's always good to keep on top of it. But one thing I will say, and as we go through it, like players that we like, we are going to be heavily exposed to. There will be a point in time where maybe you'll want to reduce that. But if you're getting a player now at this point that you maybe expect to increase in ADP over the coming months, like this might be the time to get aboard those prices. And I've joked with you in the past, but there is certain players, when it comes to the start of the season that, I'll be 20 to 25% on players at times. And that is probably a little bit more heavy than most people would tend to like. But when you then have a Trey McBride at 20% exposure last year, for example, like those things work out. And I'm going in to hit those big swings to win tournaments and have super teams. And sometimes that won't work out. But I tend to lean towards priority targets that I'm going to go all in for rather than having to have a complete diversified portfolio of 10% across the board. I'm likely to have players at 0% that I'm just not targeting, and then players I'm targeting all the time. So we will jump into it. And round one, Tom, I'm going to let you go first, and we'll see then as the draft plays out today which of these we can get in a roster. Maybe with people watching the stream, they might end up jumping into the drafts, telling them our priority targets may not be the best way to go about it, but it's here for the process and the enjoyment of it. Also, round one, who are you wanting, regardless of ADP, I guess?
For me, and if you threw ADP out the window, CD Lamb would be my 101. I don't take him there because of the scarcity of getting those picks, where CD Lamb can sometimes fall to like the 102, 103. But I would quite happily take him first off the board if we were removing ADP. You look back at last year, and the first 7 weeks were pretty disappointing with only like 14.9 PPR points per game, averages the wide receiver 24. But then across the back half of the season, he scored 28 points per game. That was 6.9 more than the next closest receiver. That's true league-winning stuff, and I think that CeeDee Lamb can absolutely be doing it again.
Yeah, and I think that would have been my first answer, and you could say that's a little bit of a cheat, I guess, and like the best wide receiver in the NFL is our priority pick. But that is another thing with, exposures, is there's only going to be a certain amount of drafts that you have the 101, 102, 103. And you mentioned that, sometimes you wouldn't take him at the 101, but he is the sort of player that I would consistently take at the 101, because if you're at the 104, you're very unlikely to ever get CeeDee Lamb. And at some point, you're going to have a run of draft luck where you're picking at the 1-8 through 112 for, what'll feel like months on end. So there is you have to take the opportunities when it's there. So CeeDee Lamb would obviously fall into that bracket. I'm going to take a little bit of a cheat answer here and say that basically the wide receivers across the board in the first round, as much as I like Breece Hall and as much as even a Bijan Robinson and a CMC, I'm heavily leaning towards the wide receivers over them, and I'm finding it very hard, unless it's a case that you're at the very back and one of those guys get to you. I'm finding it very hard to click select on the running back. So I'm going to go with the entire wide receiver crew. But if I had to say one that I am drafting more so, would be Justin Jefferson. And I just feel that, you mentioned CeeDee Lamb being the 101 for you this year. That's the way it is for me. But last year, he was clearly my 101 preference, and that was Justin Jefferson. And now we're getting him, sometimes at the 107. Obviously rewarded with a big contract over the last couple of days. But I think when we look at, some of the knocks on him for the quarterback situation, I think when we get to the end of the season, they're going to be vastly overblown especially when you're getting into the mid first round there for him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you managed to do it with mediocre quarterback play last year, I'd like to think with at least consistent mediocre
You're
quarterback
talking about
play.
Kirk Cousins, is that correct? When you're talking about mediocre quarterback play?
Well, that leads into my round 2 player, Drake London, who, I mean, I've been heavy on Drake London all off season in all formats, and Ben Gretsch put it perfectly when he said he's going to play at least 150 more snaps this year than he's ever done before, simply because the offense will stay on the field more often. And you look at what Kirk Cousins should be able to do there. I mean, he had 10 more catchable passes per game last year than Desmond Ridder did. And that's all I really need to know. There's loads more you can dive into it on there, but we'll keep it simple, and I'll keep drafting Drake London up until I hit about 25%.
Yeah, the tricky part about that is you've now taken the 2 players that I'm interested in most. I'm going.
That's why this works.
Yeah, I'm going to save the tight end for the third round. I think I was going to say, Sam Laporta could fall in there. Ideally, Garrett Wilson falling into the second round would be my dream scenario, but that doesn't happen very often. But Drake London is obviously a fantastic pick. The other player that I'm very, very interested in this year, one of the things dragging it down would be quarterback play in this situation, and that is Chris Olave. We look at the season he had last year. I think I mentioned this on the previous stream we did, the amount of almost plays, I would call them. And I just think this season there's just going to be a huge step forward from that offense with things how they've changed around in New Orleans. And I think that we're going to see Olave become maybe not into the elite tier, but I think he's going to push himself right into that group all the way down to, as I mentioned there, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua into that. And I think that, you could argue that they are in that elite tier with Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. So let's go there with let's go with Olave. I'm not going to let you steal this one, and I don't think that you are going to steal this one, but third round's Trey McBride, tight end. We talked about, and there'll be a lot of talk over the course of the offseason about, elite tight end strategy. I mentioned Sam Laporta, but Trey McBride is somebody again who entering his third season, showed a little bit as a rookie and then was stuck a little bit behind Zach Ertz last season as things kicked off. But when the season progressed and Ertz was then inevitably not just stopped, but moved out of the entire picture. And that was due to the fact that the team realized just how good he is and what they have in McBride in terms of the athletic profile. But he's heading in now to his third season, and the team has more talent and more pieces around him. And I often say this about wide receivers. Sometimes people will say, well, that's going to affect his targets. But that is also going to majorly affect how the defense tries to cover the wide receivers and somebody like Marvin Harrison. That's going to lead to him being even more impossible to cover, because rather than putting, a safety to cover his side, they're going to have to cover the wide receiver one, who people are talking about as a generational prospect. And that's going to open things up again for him, and lots more opportunity for touchdowns with him. And I just think that McBride is a smash at his ADP.
Yeah, and McBride is one of those that, like last year, you could see the reasons why it was worth drafting him. I didn't draft him as heavily as yourself, but again, it's one of those situations where if you become hesitant and if you want to wait and see it before you're ready to take a player, then you can end up missing out. And a lot of the people bulking at Trey McBride's price this year are those who didn't want to draft him last year, didn't believe in it then. And now they're like, oh, well, it's only a small sample size. And that's where I think we are with Drake London. There are people who aren't ready to pay the price because they haven't seen a lot of it. But for me,
I think we talked about this either last week or the week before. When you are waiting to see a player do it, you do not get to draft that player, because you're never going to get him in an ADP that you think is good. Either he hits and he's in the first round, or he hasn't hit and he's in the, well, last year, for example, Trey McBride was usually in the 15th round. But there's big differences in what we're, again, with our drafts today. Betting on young, talented players is where you can gain a real edge on the field. And people might say, well, you're paying a third round price for him, or you're paying a second round price for Drake London, and we haven't seen it yet. But like when they do it this year, they're both going to be in the first 6 picks next season. Maybe not McBride, but with the likes of Olave, that would be the case.
Yeah, and my round 3 player is a player I've banged on about quite a bit, and it's Deebo Samuel. I love Brandon Ayuk. There's been years where I've been heavier on Brandon Ayuk at cost than Samuel, but I don't understand why Ayuk is going ahead of him when everything Deebo Samuel did last year was better than what Brandon Ayuk delivered. Ayuk had 4 top 20 weekly finishes. He was held below 80 receiving yards on 8 occasions, didn't score touchdowns in 60% of his games, and finished as wide receiver 30 on 6 occasions. Meanwhile, Deebo was just far better than that in pretty much every category. He was more productive, more diverse, and he just wins in ways that are more integral to the team. So I don't want to not draft Brandon Ayuk, but I just find it much easier to click Deebo Samuel when he sneaks into the early parts of the 3rd round.
I would draft both of those guys, but what I find it could be just like media narrative around Deebo, for example. Over the last couple of years, we've had a couple of contract situations for him. We've had a couple of injury situations for him. And I think that maybe it's just the narrative around the player rather than anything to do with the role or the talent. But everything you said there makes a lot of sense. The other part that I'm intrigued here is, the reports of one of these guys being potentially dealt and also potentially dealt to the Pittsburgh Steelers and how that changes things. Because if either one of them move, I think the ADP is going to jump up that little bit as well. But it's hard to know what the reports exactly which way it's going to go. And if I would have to guess, with the team situation likely dealing the older player, and that would lead to them moving on Deebo, who then would be with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it could be a little bit challenging there, but both of them at ADP I think are fine. When we get in then to the 4th round, who are you looking to head up in these drafts?
Well, don't call me a homer.
Flowers, is it?
It's actually Lamar Jackson, because I prefer taking Lamar and then hoping that one of Zay Flowers or Mark Andrews finds a way back to me, just giving me that optionality. Year 2 of a Todd Monken offense, the defense is likely going to be worse. The Ravens passed on early downs at a much higher rate last year than they have under Lamar Jackson. They just weren't pushed. You go back to games against the Lions, a team who we thought were an excellent offense. They just couldn't push the Ravens. So I don't think that's going to be the case this year. And I don't really like getting much above 20% on quarterbacks, because the position just doesn't feel like one where you need to do that. But I'm quite comfortable being around that range on Lamar.
Well, I'm going to do the opposite one then. I'm going to say that in the 4th round, it should be number 4, and that is Zay Flowers. So we'll get both Baltimore Ravens in there. There's certain players that you're always, you've perfect picture in the background with the 2 jerseys for Tom. But I just think, again, young, talented player in a pretty good situation that we're going to see take that leap forward in 2024. This is a zone where I don't see a lot of players, fall in. A 3rd round, you get Waddle, you get some of the other names that we're going to talk about later in the show, but it's very rare that you get them, nipping the way around. But Zay Flowers tends to be there, and he is a player that I'm drafting a lot, because in that round he really stands out. You might get a Tank Dell or a T Higgins as well, but for me, Zay Flowers is a little bit above that group. So rather than jump into the 5th round specifically, we'll start off, we'll get ready to boot up a draft, and then we'll talk through some of the players as the rounds progress, because we are going to be targeting our priority targets, and we'll see, it'll be interesting to see how many of those kind of 4 names or the 8 names that we talked about will end up on this particular roster. But it is draft time. We'll get joined in, and we'll see how long it takes to fill up. But as it fills up, I guess we can move into discussing the 5th round if you want. Let us know, Tom, how many are we waiting on at this point?
We're sitting at 6-12, so we've got room for a couple of spots. But yeah, they tend to fill fairly well at this time of day. I would imagine we don't wait more than a minute or 2 on that one.
Millionaire contest, so we're going to try and take that down. 1.5 million to force $15 million in total prizes in this particular contest. $20 entry over at DraftKings. So waiting on those names. Let's jump into that 5th round while we wait for it to fill. And who's your 5th round guy?
So the 5th round, I've been taking a lot of Mark Andrews and a lot of Zay Flowers if either of them falls for the Lamar stack. But I've also been taking a lot of Keenan Allen. I think I find him an easier click than I find DJ Moore at cost. When you look at what Keenan Allen did last year, like led the league with 11.5 targets per game, it was like 1.5 more than the next nearest or so. I just don't think that he's going to drop off a cliff incredibly suddenly. I think the way he wins is going to be very useful for Caleb Williams. I think he's going to be productive, and I'm interested to see what he can do.
Yeah, I think he's interesting, and as you mentioned there, it's at price. That's one of the groups, and we'll see this as the draft goes ahead. There's some running back rooms that are in very close proximity to each other with ADP. Two names in similar spots, and a lot of those I'm kind of playing it out as the cheapest option in them. So if it was a case that Keenan Allen went ahead of DJ Moore and it's roles reversed at ADP, I'm willing to take DJ Moore in those situations, but more than likely that is Keenan Allen's spot, so I'm taking him. And likewise, if it falls a little bit later, Odunze is another option in that offense that I'll be going for. My pick in this round is Xavier Worthy, and he's a player this year that I feel that I'm, scarily high on in terms of, there's some of these names we talked about already that I'm willing to take, probably around ahead of ADP. And that leads to those massive exposures that I joked about at the start. It's going to be interesting to see what, shakes out with Rashee Rice with his offseason troubles, because he was somebody that I was hugely, high on as well. So obviously depending on the impact of if there's any suspension, if there's a couple of games, if it's more than a couple of games, it's going to be interesting. But I think that this is going to be the best offense, in terms of Travis Kelce and the wide receivers, outside of obviously when it was just Kelce and Tyreek Hill. But I think this is going to be the best offense from that perspective that Patrick Mahomes has ever played in. So the Chiefs this year are going to be pretty exciting. But when we look at, Hollywood Brown's going in a very similar range, and he's somebody that I haven't really drafted at all. It's pretty much Xavier Worthy and nothing else. But earlier this offseason, I mentioned Rice. Rice was somebody who I would have been taking in the second round range prior to the issues. So again, depending on what happens with him, that could make it very interesting with prices for the likes of a Worthy probably going down maybe a couple of rounds, and Rice moving back into that range.
Yeah, I'm at a very similar point with Marquise Brown. I've not drafted him at all this year because I prefer Xavier Worthy. I think that's something which I'll correct over time. I don't want to be on zero Marquise Brown when the season ticks over.
I feel like Brown's somebody, if he was going in the 9th round, I would be, very comfortable drafting. I feel like just the price that he's at seems to be quite overinflated. And I think that's probably people betting against a rookie having success and maybe thinking that he's going to have the success instead.
The thing with Marquise Brown that he seems to have on his side is he seems to always be the quarterback's best friend. Like, when he was in Baltimore, he'd pick Lamar Jackson up and drive him into the facility every day. Then he gets traded to Arizona to play with his best friend, Kyler Murray. And then already you've seen like a constant stream of stuff where him and Mahomes are hanging out or practicing together. So there's definitely...
I tend to look at those sometimes from the other side of the narrative as like, if things are so good and he's such a good teammate and such a good player, why are teams moving on from him?
Yeah,
and fair enough, Brandon Cooks had a lot of success, and had been moved around. But I'm always intrigued when players are shipped around and we're not seeing them, kept because they just cannot let them out of the building.
Yeah, he was available at a very cheap cost. I know Arizona wanted to keep him, but clearly didn't make him a particularly good deal. Like, if they'd offered him $15 million a year, there's no way that he would have taken like the very cheap deal he took with the Chiefs. So yeah, I'd agree with that. I think he must have had some offers that we didn't hear about, but it definitely didn't seem like there was a fantastic market for him in the way that there was a decent market level for other players.
Yeah, so we are ready to go in this particular draft. We got a nice little spot 3. So we'll see. Maybe CD Lamb does make it that far, but probably not. I'm usually expecting him to go in those first 2 picks. But spot 3, nice. Have said before, maybe spot 5 is a nice spot because you're getting that pick in the second round a little bit earlier. But the advantage is you're getting that early, the turn at the 3 and the it gives you a little bit of potential advantage if players were to fall through. So the draft starts in 30 seconds. Any final thoughts, Tom, on as we get ready to kick off? What are we hoping to do today? Is there any case where you pitch for CMC if he makes it to the third spot here?
I think if CMC makes it to the third spot, it's worth the conversation because I just haven't seen it really happen. I think there's some smart drafters in here, both Deft Angel at the 101 and Rob at the 112 are guys who I've drafted against a lot. Pat's Pigskin at the 102 is another name I recognize plenty. So we'll see what the room does. But yeah, I'd be open to CMC if he made it a 3, just because I've barely had any 101s yet, so my exposure levels feel quite minimal on CMC. But yeah, the picks 103 to 105, it doesn't feel like there's really any wrong answers in this range.
Yeah, and I mentioned about Waddle earlier. So I have been, and again, it's down to where I'm getting draft selections, but I haven't drafted a lot of Tyreek Hill. I would tend to be Jamar Chase over Hill. Are you Hill over Chase?
I'm I've kind of been leaning towards Chase, but we are on the clock, and CD Lamb and Tyreek Hill goes. Are we taking Christian McCaffrey?
So it's between Christian McCaffrey and Jamar Chase for me. And you have the tools and the. So I think at the 103, maybe we take McCaffrey here and see. In PPR, full PPR, it's a big edge having Christian McCaffrey, and I can see your 0% exposure. So I think you're looking to get some shares in there. But I think in full PPR, Saquon Barkley was at the 104. Okay. Already this draft could be could end up getting pulled, but we get CMC. But what I was going to say before that is the PPR element is obviously that extra half a point versus if you're drafting on underdog is massive for a player like Christian McCaffrey with the volume and the numbers he puts up. So in this format, I was more willing to click it. I think if we were in half PPR, might be a little bit different. This draft could be pretty wild the way things have. Travis Kelce went at the 107. It's a 108 spot for Jamar Chase, which is
I kind of wish we'd had a late pick just for something different there. Like I feel like Rob on the turn is going to get something very nice.
Yeah, Justin Jefferson goes at the 1-9. So interesting kickoff here.
Just to add to like the scoring situation, like CMC is one of the few players that as a running back could put up 100-yard receiving games and 100-yard rushing games, and getting those 3-point bonuses on DraftKings can really help you separate and have monster weeks. There were far more receivers last year who picked up that bonus. Obviously, you're playing more of them, but anytime that I can get CMC at a bit of a discount, it's something I'm open to. And yeah, the 104 Barkley selection is definitely one of the wildest I've seen. The Kelce one isn't far behind it.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we move through the draft, and that drafter in the 104 will be drafting before us each time. So it's going to be hard to fully have confidence in what might play out, but I'm excited for some chaos if that's the way it goes. And as Tom mentioned there, always, knowing the rules, the structures, and DraftKings does have that little added element where you're getting some of those bonuses for different, targets or achievements from players in those games. So that makes it a little bit more of a unique wrinkle looking into that and adding potential value to players, in certain spots. So good call out there from Tom. We are 4 picks away since we have selected. We have had, I think, the draft go a little bit more to plan, but we're getting into that zone now where, Isaiah Pacheco is going off the board. I don't know. Is this draft going to count when it's all over? We'll see. We'll see what happens.
DraftKings barely ever cancel them, but your boy Chris Olave is right.
This is a no-brainer. Yeah.
At pick 22, falling 4 spots past ADP, particularly given we weren't running back in the first round. That makes all the sense in the world to me. I mean, the Saquon Barkley drafter took Mike Evans, which isn't that outlandish. His ADP's around that spot. So maybe they just fell asleep to start the draft and we're going to get a more sensible team out of them from now on. But Kelce and Pacheco, I'm intrigued to see whether they just keep leaning into this and try some form of Chiefs mega stack. I have seen a few teams doing that. Somebody showed me a draft the other day where a team took 5 straight Ravens from the 12 slot, taking, I think it was Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, and Lamar Jackson, maybe just a 4. So, yeah.
We will
Draft.
have an option here. Neighbours goes off the board. Nico Collins has gone off the board. One pick away. We'll see. But there's obviously Jonathan Taylor as an option. But players that that I'd be interested in here would be the likes of Waddle. Probably prioritizing Waddle, but it would be a situation where Jonathan Taylor has 10 picks after ADP, which is interesting. But Waddle is right at ADP here. And then we do have the tight ends, but I would probably see if we can push it and see maybe if a McBride does sneak back to us, which could be a challenge. But do you want to go with Jonathan Taylor, or do you want to go? I'd go with Waddle, but do you want that ADP discount?
Let's go with Waddle. I mean, the ADP discount, 10 picks in this draft is going to be massive. But when the rooms start getting a little bit wild, it's not that I play cautious. It's more just that I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm going to have to start catching up. And if we had a really wide receiver heavy run before things made it back to us, I'd be a little bit concerned about what our wide receiver 2 and 3 options would end up looking like.
Yeah, and although I did mention McBride being my favorite target and this particular round, Waddle is usually somebody I would be willing to reach for in the second round. Where that Olave pick was made, let's say Olave's not there, I'm probably looking at Neighbours or Waddle. So with Waddle being available in the third, Jonathan Taylor does eventually go to the Breece Hall drafter in the third round at the 306. So Breece Hall, Devontae Adams, Jonathan Taylor, probably quite a unique start there. We do see Patrick Mahomes go to the Chiefs drafter, I guess we'll say at this point, and then Jalen Hurts has gone off the board. So 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends. We're heavily in the wide receiver streets, but I'm very interested to see how it plays out, because the 3 players that we've started off with is quite a hot start. So we'll see how it plays out. If we get some draft luck as it goes along and some more players fall to us, we start to get into a pretty hot spot. So let's see how it plays out. ADP wise, I'm probably not expecting our tight end target here to come back to us around after ADP, but there's a number of other tight ends that I'm intrigued to draft as well, and we'll see how it plays out. Maybe Lamar Jackson gets back to us. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a best ball draft stream for me without Lamar Jackson coming up in conversation. But yeah, so far, I mean, the players that have come off the board for the most are kind of pretty normal for DraftKings drafts. It's just the order that some of them have come off. I've got to assume that this team out of the 7th spot is about to take Xavier Worthy with the 406 for their 4th consecutive Chiefs player, which is definitely different and fun. But yeah, it's not something I would normally do. Oh, Travis Etienne goes. So no wide receiver.
We make it worthy here if that works out. Lamar Jackson does go off the board. We may also get Trey McBride, and we may have a discussion to have if we have the option of McBride or Worthy. But by ADP, it would completely make sense to go the McBride route and hope that Worthy comes back around. I know you're a big Mark Andrews fan. He would be somebody if we wanted to go Worthy and see if Andrews comes back around, which would be what we'd probably expect. But it is, I think, Trey McBride, if we get one more pick here, would be absolute perfection.
Just easy click, Trey McBride there, and yeah.
And again, right there, in the range ADP wise that we're looking to get him. But yeah, that's I think if I'm always interested. So Deft Angel is at the 1 spot, and they were watching him previously, so I don't want to talk too much about what we might do there in the chat, but we definitely don't want Trey McBride to make it back around the corner here. What are you thinking?
Yeah,
who's our backup plan?
Yeah, Trey McBride just made too much sense to make that click there. Like, you don't want 2 teams who don't have the elite tight end, who've both got different builds. If I was at the 102 there, I would have wanted a second wide receiver, but I would have absolutely assumed that one of the elite tight ends in Trey McBride or Mark Andrews would have gone off the board. And yeah, like I say, in these kind of rooms where things get a little bit wild, just take the picks which make the most sense and which work for the build you've got. So we've got McCaffrey, Olave, Waddle, and McBride. Worthy goes 1 pick ahead of us. We are back on.
That's a crusher.
Amari Cooper, T. Higgins, Christian Kirk.
I'm probably looking at Keenan Allen here. The other thing I wouldn't be against would be taking Dalton Kincaid. as a second tight end, but I think Allen makes more sense because we still have alternative options beyond this at the tight end position that we would target. But again, like we talked about recently, ideally I'm looking to get two of those elite tight ends on the roster. I would love to get Worthy there, but I think Keenan Allen's a nice fallback option. But yeah, that's unfortunate, one pick away.
Yeah, I agree, and I definitely would have been quite happy to take Xavier Worthy there. Keenan Allen, just a slightly easier pick. I know we did a stream 2 weeks ago where we took Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews, and I do like that doubling up on the elite or elite potential tight ends. Keenan Allen.
And certain drafts were depending on how things are playing out, and if we didn't have, let's say, Worthy and Allen are gone there, and you don't have another option that you really like at wide receiver, I'm willing then to jump in as early as this at it. But generally, it's trying to get one of those top three guys, and basically when I say that, it's trying to get Sam Laporta or Trey McBride. Then it will be Kincaid, and then after that, it's trying to get one of the options with Njoku or before. So there's still a lot of time to work through the next couple of rounds, and I think the difference in adding that starting wide receiver to the lineup is what kind of tilts it there at this particular point of the draft. So I'm really enjoying this one so far. The other thing that, setting it up like this gives you some options to fill in pieces off these rosters later in the draft. It opens up a lot of options as to who those quarterbacks are, because the players that we've drafted are not necessarily quarterbacks that are going right at the start of the tiers, and you might get some window quarterbacks, to add in. So it takes a little bit of pressure off trying to, get the exact stacks, and then it gives you a little bit of a chance to, build out those stacks as the draft progresses. So,
we've got so much optionality at the minute. Like you say, none of our quarterbacks have gone off the board so far, and while that can be sometimes a little bit tricky, I know we've pushed our luck sometimes with quarterbacks. Right now,
we mightn't push it as far today as we did last week.
Yeah, last week got a little dicey. But yeah, in terms of the players still there, I think when it comes back around to us, that there should be plenty of players of a decent caliber. We've got, we're a good few.
I'm not going to pitch it out yet because I want to get to that pick, but I have something in mind if things were to work out when it gets to our pick here.
The team at 107 has gone double Jaguars after starting with 3 Chiefs, so intrigued to see what they do here. Chiefs around that area have both gone off the board.
What I was hoping to do is get George Kittle across, and that would open up San Francisco then with Christian McCaffrey, but he did go pretty much immediately after I mentioned that.
So we're a couple of picks away. Kenneth Walker, Chris Godwin, David Montgomery, Lad McConkey, Jordan Addison, Evan Ingram, Zamir White, Roma Dunze, Swift, DeAndre Hopkins, Kyler Murray, Rashee Rice. There's a few players I like in this range, Colm. Anyone you want to make a pitch for? We're one pick away.
I would lean Addison if we're going with a wide receiver here. I mentioned Dunze earlier. You could lean into the Bears side of things, but then you do become a little bit reliant on getting the quarterback to go along with it. So Addison would be my pick. Have you a different option that you want to go with?
No, Addison works for me. I think, he started last season kind of on fire, and obviously it tailed off a bit, and his splits weren't always the greatest, but I think he can really make a strong leap in year 2. I know we've talked previously about how you don't like Kyler Murray, but any thoughts to stacking him with Trey McBride coming around this turn?
Maybe he gets drafted before he comes back to us.
Both teams on the turn already have quarterbacks, so
yeah, not completely against it, but I did a draft that's going to come out. We drafted against the RotoViz overtime listeners at the weekend, and that was a team where we ended up with Kyler Murray, and it was a super flex format, and I wasn't, all sold on the pick, but I can see still the the narrative and the situation that you could sell that it leads to him having a big season. But I think I would probably still look to push quarterback unless there's nothing really set up for us here. And there is a couple of names that do intrigue me.
So we could take Kenneth Walker, 12 picks past ADP. David Montgomery, Lad McConkey, I don't mind at this point in the draft.
Did we just
Rashee
miss
Rice.
out on Jalen Warren? Did he just go before us?
No, Warren's still there. He's got a good chance to make it back. His ADP's 90, so we've got a little bit.
Do you want to take? Let's take Kyler then. Let's do it. Let's do it. You mentioned it. I think if that's the play you want to do.
Well, I just think I know you're not overly sold on him, but even last year when he came back from the knee injury, he was still rushing for 5.4 rush attempts per game. He was doing an okay job, and the offense around him was pretty miserable. Marquise Brown was banged up all the time. Trey McBride was really the only adequate player. No offense to Greg Dortch or Rondale Moore, but I think when you put Marvin Harrison into that team and you give Trey McBride an even bigger role, I'm just quite excited about what this offense could look like this year. And I think in terms of weekly spike weeks, they could be a team who could have really big ones.
There's definitely the profile there, when you're looking for the Russian quarterback and also, somebody who can put up the passing numbers. So I've no doubts about the profile. The problem I have is we just haven't truly seen it for a long time. And again, a little bit like I mentioned with, players who are being moved from team to team, he's somebody who there's always, whether it's the team leaks it or whether it's just the media making it up, there's always different things with Kyler that never sound, all that promising. But yeah, maybe he's the one this year. But pairing him with Trey McBride does make sense. And for somebody who's as in on Trey McBride as I am, I probably need to reevaluate my Kyler Murray, thoughts in terms of exposure. Like I'm drafting Trey McBride all the time, but it's very rare that I'm drafting him to stack with Murray. So I'm interested to see how that works out.
I think I'm just willing to give him a little bit of a pass for some of the Cliff Kingsbury years. I know Cliff Kingsbury designed a good run game, but the passing game was so poor at times and just so uninspiring. So, yeah.
Which were worse, the Cliff Kingsbury years or the Arthur Smith years? Which
I'm definitely going Arthur Smith years. They were far more.
We'll see, because if it does get back to us, I mentioned Jalen Warren. We're still buying into Arthur Smith with him in this situation. So we'll see if we get him back to us. Yeah, the other thing I was going to highlight is, tight end has moved in the last couple of rounds. So we had Kittle, who I was talking about, but Njoku did go one pick before us, who would have been an option with the Addison pick. And then Evan Ingram went one pick after the Murray pick. So we might be doing it a little bit different here today and going with the 3 tight end build and pushing it with, or maybe even a 4 tight end with some of those later guys as we look at it. So again, another fun. It can be fun when the draft isn't set up exactly. There's the last one. I didn't want to mention his name. Brock Bowers is just off the board. I was hoping to not mention him and see what he sneaked back, but yeah, that one was disappointing. So we're one pick away. Really hoping that we would see Warren slip through here. That would be pretty nice, because he does slip through. He would have been the pick for me when we take that Kyler pick. So this has worked out really well, and that would be the clear option for me here. The other names, I'm not actually going to mention because they may come back in the turn. I think we just take them 20 or just right at ADP. I get caught out with the rank versus the ADP on your screen sometimes.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. And ADP. But the ADP on DraftKings does kind of update constantly, so you tend to see a lot of movements with them. But the rank are my rankings, and they're due an update in the next day or two. I try to stay reasonably close on him, but Jalen Warren, I'm about 20 spots ahead of ADP on, and I will not be moving him anywhere close to his ADP.
Yeah. Not even Arthur Smith can put us off that situation.
No, I just got to lean into it, and in the 8th round, it's completely fine. I mean, I would draft Najee Harris around here if I had to. Team before us takes 3 quarterbacks quite quickly. We're up. We could wide receiver, things die off pretty quickly. Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, Rashid Shaheed.
And nothing there really.
Running back, or we could take Caleb Williams and be kind of done with quarterback, maybe 8 seconds.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Purdy. Or Brock Purdy.
No, let's go with Williams for the fun of it.
So we've got Christian McCaffrey, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Trey McBride, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Kyler Murray, Jalen Warren, and Caleb Williams. 2 quarterbacks, 2
I would have looked at Tua there, but he did go one pick, and I thought when Goff went off the board, he was the player that I didn't name was JSN. He went off to Death Angel, who tends to like some of the same names that we tend to like. So good pick up there for him. But we got a little bit of a consolation prize, another player that I haven't been able to get as much of, but that was an area where, ideally I'm not looking to target quarterback, kind of similar to the Kyler Murray pick. But when some of the players that you're hoping that would be available aren't there, then that opens up the door to take some of those kind of selections as well. So a little bit different than the teams that I would normally have with those 2 quarterbacks. But I think unless something extraordinary happens, I think we're pretty set up at QB, and it might even open the door. Talked about the tight ends and things like that, but potentially see how the draft's playing out. But maybe a Komet comes in as an option to go along with him as well. So pretty fun. I would have like leaned straight to running back outside of that, but again, it would have been Jonathan Brooks most likely, and I think that because we have Warren and McCaffrey, I was much more willing to let that slide through.
Yeah, I mean, if normally I want to have 5 wide receivers by round 9 in most DraftKings drafts. But I've found myself when I've taken 2 running backs and I've gone with like a hero RB approach and then another one around that kind of round 7 to 8 range. But sometimes I'm pushing that because the wide receivers dry up so quickly.
Yeah.
And particularly in draft latest where we've got Warren and we've got McCaffrey, we've got 2 quarterbacks. I think, it's easy to see us leaning towards maybe 8 wide receivers or above, which isn't unusual at all. I think last year there was 40% of the finalists on DraftKings had at least 8 wide receivers or exactly 8 wide receivers. So it's definitely viable. And, I've seen plenty of teams in the finals with as many as 10. Not saying we necessarily need that, but we can spend on wide receiver a little more than we might have if we'd already hit 5.
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything that you've talked through there. But again, we talked about the tiers, and JSN is for me where that fall off occurs. The wide receiver since that: Curtis Samuel, Shakir, Cooks, Shaheed, Tyler Lockett. So there is a big tier there. Interested to see now what happens. So I think it could be a point where we look to take some running backs potentially. Few names here coming up that I do like. Anyone that's standing out for you or one pick away that you want to make the pitch for?
I really like Tajay Spears. Try to take more of him. Chase Brown, I like. Blake Corum gives a little bit of correlation against the Niners in week 15 and Cardinals in week 17. And then, yeah, we've talked about it, but Jerome Ford's somebody I'm taking a bit more, but maybe we don't need to reach down that far. Otherwise, I don't mind Dallas Goedert. I think he's being undervalued, but yeah, who do you want to go with here?
I think I would take Spears here. I'd be between Spears and Chase Brown would be the 2 options, but by ADP we'll play that game and see if somebody sneaks back to us.
Yeah, Chase Brown, maybe if I was the Joe Burrow drafter, I'd take him, but he's got 3 running backs and 3 quarterbacks already, so it feels like his priorities probably should be elsewhere.
I think quarterback should be his priority. I think this.
You really got to lock down that 4th one. And Death Angel, as always, in on the same players as us and takes Chase Brown, and we're back up. So yeah, backup running back. There's nobody really who I'd be dying to take. I don't mind Blake Corum, but I could maybe take Jacoby Myers.
Go to the tight ends. Are you interested in Komet?
No, but let's take him if you like him.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for this team.
My problem with Komet has been that he's just always, he disappears so often. And yes, part of that can be a Justin Fields problem, but he does disappear a lot. But I don't mind it in this build because we're definitely pushing our chips in on Trey McBride, paying off cost anyway. So
yeah, the other part of it is like he has, if you look back to last season, there was weeks where he did nothing, but there was weeks then where he is like 2 touchdowns, massive games, and what you're looking for here is to have those massive games. So I like McBride I like Komet, and I liked him going into last season, and so there was quite a bit of frustration. He's a player that I own quite a bit of in Dynasty, And so there was in that format frustration with some of those weeks, but there was weeks then where he pretty much, single-handedly pushes you over the line with a win. So he's pretty much going at the same spot that he was going last year, even though he had a relatively okay season. It wasn't that it was a terrible season. And when we're looking for some of those correlations with your quarterback, it's something that I'm willing. We were there a little bit ahead of ADP on him, but again, that turned on a bit of damage. The Chase Brown and the next player I would have been looking at wide receiver was Mitchell, and he went off the board that one pick before us as well. So, that was probably the two players that I would have taken there. And when they both go back to back picks, that puts you in a little bit of a hole of where to find the running backs as well. Just there's a little bit of gap there where I think that most of those names that we're looking at probably sneak back to us in the 12th round here to have a shot at those. Pretty heavy quarterback round here as well. We get Rodgers, Cousins, Lawrence, and Herbert going off the board. So again, if things like that continue, that would be nice to push some of those other players back towards us.
Are you at all concerned with Cole Kmet that the Bears signed Gerald Everett pretty quickly, and that I think it's one of the offensive coordinator or one of you quite high up on the offensive side has had Gerald Everett in his system before?
Everett is somebody who over the years, I've been interested in drafting. I think though sometimes you can't just go into situations with just the one tight end on your roster. You're going to need some depth. So I think that what the Bears have done is good in terms of getting talented players on the roster to help out the quarterback that they're after drafting with the first overall pick. And with that, you're going to have some competition for places. But Everett is somebody who, over the last 2 seasons has had 51, 58 catches, 3 and 4 touchdowns. They're solid numbers, but they're not numbers that are, completely going to eradicate another player. And I think it'll be a pretty good competition. But I still think Kmet's the tight end one. But I just think the Bears have done a good job building out this. And as a Packers fan, that's pretty tricky. So there's competition there. Would I prefer if he wasn't there? Yes, that would be correct. But they do also need to have depth at the tight end position.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're few picks away. TJ Hawkinson slipping past ADP, but for me, this is the only range where I'd take Hawkinson. I just don't think we need to. Jerry Judy's pick dropped 10 spots past ADP. I could talk myself into that for a little bit of Miami correlation with Jalen Waddle. That gives our 5th wide receiver. I'll let you cast your eyes over this before we come back around the turn for our round 13 pick.
So there's multiple players that are in this list now that would have been in conversation for me when we took Cole Kmet. And this is what I talk about sometimes with the rounds, maybe where you take the player. We take Kmet probably where we took Judy there, and they flip them around, and all of a sudden you're not really questioning the ADP of the players that we're drafting. But now when we're back up, so a lot of the running backs here, what I'd be looking at, Kendra Miller, for example, is probably my priority target here. But you have Vidal, Irvin, Tracy. But I think some of those names again will sneak back to us in the next round. Hit me with the wide receivers. I know we only have 10 seconds left, but again, I think they're sliding through as well.
Yeah, no, I'm good with Kendra Miller. I think the reports has just been so consistent about what the Saints expect from him in year 2, for him to take a bigger jump, about how many injuries he dealt with last year during camp, and it just kind of set him back. And yeah, I'm happy to bet on second-year running backs. It's something that Andrew Erickson of Fantasy Pros keeps banging on about lately, and he's got plenty of great stats to back up his points. And taking bets on second-year running backs is something that feels like a good choice to do now and again.
Yeah, most players, most positions enter in the second year, you're going to see a jump. Obviously, they haven't had to go through, combines, off-season training to get into shape for a combine to run a 40-yard dash, which probably doesn't help you with anything then when you're in the NFL. You'll hear reports of players basically having to retrain their bodies after the draft, and this time they'll have had an off-season. They know what to expect when they're going through the processes, and then obviously they improve as players as well. So second-year jumps at most positions happen. But yeah, Kendra Miller for me is a pretty much priority target. as well. It's going to be fun here through these last, like we're heading into the 14th round. I think we're set up with a lot of flexibility, and it's going to give us a huge amount of options. The other thing I mentioned, the depth, and I was just pulling it up here as we're looking at the rest of the draft. So when you look at the Bears, for example, Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett, you could say are tight end 1A and 1B, but like they've Tommy Sweeney and Stephen Carlson behind that. So if you have any recent notes on either of those guys, let me know. I think both these tight ends are going to get work, and I think draft them. But what could be interesting, again, I've talked about this in the past. I don't usually draft players at the same position, but who knows? Maybe Everett a little bit later, if he falls past ADP or something, could work into the lineup, because again, you're trying to correlate that with your quarterback.
So Everett, yeah, he's gone undrafted in most drafts with an ADP.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
It's like probably more of an advantage on underdog, but yeah, like using the last round pick on him isn't something I'd be against. We're a few picks away. Antonio Gibson, J.K. Dobbins, Khalil Herbert, Jaleel McLaughlin, Elijah Mitchell, and then running back kind of disappears. Are there any of these guys you want to go with? Or at wide receiver, Darnell Mooney, Roman Wilson, Jermaine Burton, Wan'Dale Robinson, Malachi Corley, Rashad Bateman?
Most of these are well past ADP. Wan'Dale would be my pick, but have you somebody else you want to go with? Because it's not too far off. He's not leading your rankings here, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I'm fine with that. I think, yeah, I mean, like I say, I need to refresh my rankings this week. Wan'Dale, I like him definitely. I think he's fun. I just kind of see the ceiling on some of the other players and get lured in by that a little bit more. And I think there's just part of me that worries that what Wan'Dale's good at might overlap with what Malik Neighbors is good at, and Malik Neighbors is going to be better at it. But
yeah.
I think taking a player like him who can really accumulate a bunch of receptions in a game, and we've seen him do it on a number of occasions, it's a cheat code on DraftKings. Like, there's been weeks where on DFS slates, one day will be like 3K, and he'll just blow the complete slate open because he'll get like 9 receptions for 45 yards or something. But
the thing is too, but like I was talking with the Bears, like the Giants' entire passing group, like there's a lot to offer up there for Neighbors. There's still a lot to work around for the rest of the guys, so that's why I'm still in on Wan'Dale. We have seen things in the past from him, but we've also seen, you mentioned earlier, some of the quarterback situations around the league that was not the best either there. So we are back up. Go back to the running backs for me. Again, I think we're jumping down, like we're well down the list in terms of the options. So have you a priority here for yourself?
I mean, I prefer to go Darnell Mooney.
Okay, let's do it. We're way past ADP.
Yeah, I think just scooping that ADP, and when we look at like what we've done at wide receiver since round 6, we only added Jerry Jeudy and Wan'Dale Robinson. So just finding another player who should have a fairly defined role. The Falcons paid him reasonable money. They weren't shy about doing it. They knew they needed to add somebody opposite Drake London. And I just think when I look at this, we've got plenty of guys who near the top who can give us the big play in Olave, Waddle, Addison, guys like Keenan Allen and Wan'Dale Robinson, who could accumulate a lot of receptions, more so for Keenan, obviously. But then Darnell Mooney and Jerry Jeudy feel similar in their kind of roles. They're going to give us weeks. They're going to give us weeks which are completely useless. But just adding another one of those before you get into the real dart throw territory of wide receiver, as we kind of look down here. I mean, you're talking Marvin Mims, Luke McCaffrey, Zay Jones, Demarcus Robinson, Ario Douglas. I'd still take Mooney comfortably ahead of those every time. So yeah,
I would too. Mooney's somebody, like, he's had a very weird start to his career. So he's 26 now. He's going to be 27 during the season. But he's somebody, as he comes into the NFL, has a pretty good start. Basically eradicates Allen Robinson from the Bears offense, and really, like, he was somebody I was very invested in at that point in time, as he was making a leap. But it just,
he was like a round 4 player.
Yeah, it just didn't happen from that point forward. And I think maybe not being, and obviously it hasn't been the primary part of offenses recently, but I can see him as the second or third piece with Kirk Cousins and that offense still being very valuable. You're into the 15th round. I think that it's a nice spot to get him. And interestingly enough, he was somebody that I had been kind of looking at, but he's a player that's very hard to gauge people's opinions if they actually want to draft him or not. But yeah, I think it fits this team. We're now up to 7 wide receivers. We have 4 running backs. I think we're going to have some running back options that will get to us here. Vidal was one I was hoping would get to us in the last round. So we have missed out on some of the names that I would have really liked to get. But the other player I was looking at that last pick would have been a Marvin Mims. He goes at the 16-11. So Tracy goes off the board, but is there a running back here that you want to have on the roster?
I've been taking a good bit of Khalil Herbert. I just wonder if 35 picks past ADP, J.K. Dobbins is worth it.
I'm going to let you make the pick here. Neither of them were but let's do it and let's see if the other one gets back to us, because I think we take 2 running backs here most likely.
So the only time I've been drafting J.K. Dobbins is when he's been falling, and did a draft with Eric Bienfall where we got Dobbins 50 spots past ADP,
Right.
getting it almost 40 picks past ADP. There just seems to be some rooms where it really happens, and I'm very realistic about J.K. Dobbins' outlook this year.
The one thing, we mentioned Vidal a second ago. The thing with Dobbins is if Dobbins is actually, let's say, even 80% of what he can be, like he's running that backfield and he's the starting running back. So at this point, and with having the running backs we have so far, I'm really well. So we miss out on the guy that you mentioned. The name that I would be looking to draft here would be Will Shipley. Out of the rookie running backs, he's the one that I tend to be drafting the most and trying to pick him up in these situations. So I'm good to go with another running back and kind of see out our RB room. Is there any other player that you want to pitch for?
No, I'm completely fine with that. I have been taking a little bit more Damian Pierce lately. Maybe it's just feeding into the OTAs hype where they've talked about expecting him to do better this year. And the biggest thing last year seemed to be that he just didn't grasp the playbook properly in time in a new offensive scheme. It was his second year in the league. So maybe there's a situation where in his third year, he's had the off season where a bit of reality check and he comes in and is stronger with it. But yeah, I don't want to be much above where I'm at the minute, which is around the 10 to 11% range. I think if something was to happen to Joe Mixon, I'm not sure that Damian Pierce is going to be a 3-down back for the entirety of your season. But yeah, I like Shipley. I think if in doubt, bet on good offenses.
Here's a question for you at the running back position. We have a lot of week 5 running backs, I believe. Scroll up for me. I think that 3 of our 5, have we 5 or 6 running backs at this point? I think we're up to 6.
Yeah, 5, 5, 12, 5, 9, 9.
Oh, we're okay. Yeah, okay. I couldn't see up to the top. So yeah, we're going all in on week 9 and week 5 by the looks of things for the running backs. But it was just a case of I didn't know what the running backs above that were sitting at. So now we're okay. We can relax. We could have had
as long as everybody shows. As long as everybody shows up to the party when McCaffrey and Warren are out in week 9, we'll be okay. But yeah, in terms of the rest of this room, the team 1 pick ahead of us at 102 is now up to 4 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. The team that started with the 3 straight Chiefs is sitting at a 2-5-7-3, having taken Kelsey, Pacheco, Mahomes, and then they added an unstacked Brock Purdy. But otherwise, kind of feels like they've recovered the team to at least a respectable rate. There's nothing else that's massively standing out to me in terms of the builds we've got in here. Just the usual mixed bag of DraftKings rooms.
Yeah, we've 1 4 quarterback team in the second spot, so it's a 4-5-6-2 team, which would be a little bit different at this point of the draft with multiple picks left. But everyone else is pretty much in tow at this particular point. They're pretty balanced as to what we would expect. So we are up in 6 picks. We are going to have 3 more selections, but as we're sitting now, lots of flexibility as to what way we want to play it. So it's really a case of what the options are when they're on the board, and then we can make those decisions. But yeah, this is a range where if we, we're looking at other players, I do think that, Bo Nix would be somebody I've been trying to draft with some of the kind of backdooring a Broncos stack. I'm going to wait. You talk for a minute. I'm going to talk in a second then if
Yeah,
that works
I mean, in terms of what we've got with a Hero RB build and having Christian McCaffrey, I'm quite comfortable leaving it at 6 running backs if we want to. If there's a running back who pops up, Tank Bigsby I've been taking a bit of. Alexander Mattison I take more from doing 0 RB builds, and I want to tell myself a story or a lie, as Pete Overzet would say. Tight ends, there's Chigakonkwo, Mike Gesicki. They're okay players, but not players I have a huge amount of faith in. Obviously, we talked about Gerald Everett earlier. So, yeah, there's not masses. Who did you want to mention, Colm?
Did Justin Fields go? No.
Justin Fields is still on the clock.
How do you feel about Justin Fields as like a skeleton key for?
Can we push him around the corner? Because
I don't think so after mentioning him now. Who's your player? Hit your player. Go for your player. Get your player.
Let's go Justin Fields. There's nobody I feel strong enough about where I'm like, okay. Elijah Moore for a little week 17 correlation with somebody I've not clicked at all yet. So I could do that. Or Malik Washington to build out that non-Tua quarterback stack. Yeah, Greg Dortch, obviously, in Arizona, if we wanted to build on the Kyler and Trey McBride stack. I know some people are kind of still in on Greg Dortch at running back. Yeah, do you feel like we need a 7th running back?
I think we're probably done at running back.
Yeah, and then at tight end, is there anybody you feel strong enough that you'd want to take here rather than waiting? And
no, I think we push that around and we add Everett to the queue just maybe to see. But I'm willing to take tight end as our last pick. So we are up. I'm good with either of those names. Darts probably makes the most sense, but which way do you want to play that? Like, Darts isn't a player that I'm a fan of outside of like trying to build out a stack here.
Yeah, Dortch makes plenty of sense, and again, it's just like that.
More is somebody who I've always, I guess, overvalued and drafted a lot of. But in this situation with this team, this makes more sense. The Justin Fields pick, interestingly enough, Russell Wilson goes to the team in 2, who I believe is now up to 5 quarterbacks.
Yeah, that's right. We've got Burrow, Goff, Tua, Will Levis, and Russell Wilson.
And look, I'll always say, like, sometimes these things could work out, but it won't be down to the way this team is drafted. It would be more luck than strategy, I think, if it played out. But 5 quarterbacks and 5 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 3 tight ends. It's historically not the formula that we're trying to achieve here. But back to Justin Fields, I just think that Fields, if he's a starting quarterback, we're talking about, if you had asked me who would I rather draft, I think I would rather draft Justin Fields over Kyler Murray. But obviously that's taking ADP into consideration. But if you get to a case where you're into the playoffs in week 16, 17, and all of a sudden Fields is playing, like his rush, you mentioned the rushing potential and the receiving potential for like Christian McCaffrey. Like Justin Fields is one of those quarterbacks who can get rushing bonus for 100 yards rushing. Funnily enough, like the end of last season was some of the best that Justin Fields has played in his career, and then the team just didn't want to keep him. And obviously we've talked on this show a few times about when teams kind of tell you what they're thinking by not wanting a player around. We also seen that with Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos. So both of those quarterbacks have that kind of baggage. But yeah, I just think when you're in the 18th round, there's not many players with the game, like the actual tournament breaking upside, and I feel Justin Fields could be that. So on a team where you have 3 quarterbacks, or you have 2 already, and you're not really relying that he has to be playing, I think that it's a smart play to put in there. Would he be somebody? I always ask Sean this when we do drafts. If you were drafting that solo, would he be somebody you would even consider there?
I think with Jaylen Warren, I'm open to it because Justin Fields checked down at like the 2nd highest.
So now we're elaborating now to it's a Justin Fields, Jaylen Warren stack.
Which, I mean, he's not somebody I want huge exposure to because I do just worry that Justin Fields might just be struggling to get an
Could
opportunity.
get those kickoff return points as well. Maybe.
They're big and valuable. I just worry the Steelers are such a headstrong organization at time, and they made the bet on Russell Wilson, and then it was only really the Kenny Pickett drama that saw Justin Fields come in. But yeah, if I can get a Week 17 bunch of receptions to Jalen Warren, some rushing out of it, Justin Fields will take it. So we're back on 3682 currently. Do we want Gerald Everett to give ourselves a bit of a different build, or anybody else standing out as a kind of flick through?
I'm not overly bothered if we take Everett. I do think that it's a little bit of a kind of an insurance that like you're stacking them with a quarterback, so you have like touchdown upside from two players in that offense. So I think in this team it makes sense to go Everett. Like the other options that are there, you know, a Okonkwo is fine, but you know, again, I just think in this build that was a play that made sense. And the other thing, again, when you're looking at players who are undrafted in this range, you know, if it is a case that this team is advancing into, you know, situations and you know, into the playoffs, into the finals, you get into a situation then where you have undrafted players who are like even lower owned because they've been undrafted on the rosters, and that's going to again potentially be an edge later on. But I think, you know, when we talk about the running backs, obviously you could have like one running back have a rushing touchdown and another running back have a rushing touchdown in the same game. But I tend to try to avoid drafting running backs from the same backfield. But with tight ends, and particularly in this situation where there is some ambiguity as to, you know, the definitive starter, you're paying pretty much nothing at that point to do it. Whereas if you're looking at, you know, doing it with, say, running backs, it's multiple picks in a certain range, you know, 8 through 10, for example. And this, you're like looking at who do we pick at this point, and you're completely kind of ensuring that position. But not only that, it could be a case that, you know, those guys alternate touchdown scoring weeks, or those guys scoring the same week, and, you know, Trey McBride is a bye in week 11, for example. You know, you never know how it plays out. So at that cost, it's not something I think I'll be doing often, but I think in this team, again, it made sense. There was quite a few decisions on this roster that on other occasions I probably I'm not doing. And, you know, for example, we have two quarterbacks through 9 rounds. That made it easier for me then to do the Justin Fields pick. But last week, for example, when we were like pitching together those quarterbacks at the end, you know, adding Justin Fields to that, another question mark at quarterback, is probably not the way to do it. So again, this roster opened up some doors and pathways to allow us to do things a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. Like I was just looking at it, and it's not the kind of roster I've drafted so far, partly because I've had no CMC. But getting him at the 103 and then building out this kind of hero build, it's been fun. It's been different. I think, yeah, the tight end room is one which is interesting. I like how we've built that. And Justin Fields later on makes sense, even though I might not have done it. So, yeah, I think when you look at it with CMC, Olave, Waddle, McBride, Allen, Addison, Kyler, Warren, Caleb Williams, Tajay Spears, Komet, Judy, Kendre Miller, Wandale Robinson, Darnell Mooney, Dobbins, way past ADP, Shipley, Fields, Dortch, and Everett. There's plenty of correlation, plenty of little mini stacks, and plenty of reasons to think it could work.
Yeah, and there is other players, you know, that I would prefer in certain situations. But when you look at that like Fields pick and you look at the names that are drafted after it, like there's probably like 6 names out of those 3 rounds that I'm actually like wanting to draft. So you get like there is the flexibility there when things like that open up. But yeah, I like how the team played out, different than we normally do, but it is loaded with upside. And a couple of, as we mentioned there, even the Fields pick at the time we made that selection, that was an unintentional stack with Warren for me. I just thought that that was the best pick on the board at that moment in time. But there's a lot of upside in this with Christian McCaffrey, with Warren as the running backs, and the running backs behind that. But then you have the elite tight end and Trey McBride. Lots of rushing upside at the quarterback position, which is going to be an added advantage, looking for that hybrid profile. And then Olave, Waddle, Allen, Addison, you move on through the rest of them. There's a pretty loaded up team. But I've really enjoyed this one. A little bit different, but that's part of the fun is putting those rooms together. And especially when we're doing it there's a couple of picks there where, you know, when you're doing these, you just get so relaxed as the clock is ticking down. You're just like, Who do you want? So fun times. Before we finish up, Tom, obviously next week we'll be hoping to do this over on your channel again, the Fantasy Sanctuary. Let the listeners know what they can find over there, and what have you anything else going on at the moment you want to let them know about?
Yeah, so dropped a video about what makes elite quarterbacks in fantasy football over the weekend, talking about pocket passes versus dual threats and the difference in them. That's 15 minutes long and well worth checking out. Last night, drafted with Tyler in the Superflex Underdog Puppy. And then tomorrow night, we'll be drafting with Andrew Erickson of Fantasy Pros back in the DraftKings streets. More Dynasty content coming from Rich, so busy as ever. Just a good time to subscribe.
So that's a good plug to subscribe to their channel, but also make sure if you're watching this, subscribe to the RotoViz YouTube channel. If you're listening on the podcast side, make sure you are subscribed to those podcast players. Obviously, Google Podcasts has, obviously been closed down over the last couple of days or weeks. So if you were a previous listener on Google, you can't get it there. Make sure you subscribe somewhere else to get the podcasts when they're available. Make sure you are subscribed, whether that's on YouTube or over at the audio side of things. That is going to do it for this edition of the show. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. Check out Tom over on the X platform as well. But until we are back, have a good one.